Yo, what's going on? Good morning, guys. Good morning. I want to say welcome back to class for this one because we're going there today. This is going to be in depth. But what we're going to talk about today is where the magic is. It's where the magic lies. And I want to give a little bit of a heads up. Before we jump into what we're about to go through, I need to let you know that this is the shit that excites the fuck out of me. You know, we talk a lot about all the rah motivational stuff usually, but today we're getting into the nitty gritty. The stuff that's worth more than any amount of money on this planet. The stuff that keeps me up at night. Specifically, the 5 health metrics that I worry about the most. And I want to say that while I do worry about them, it is within our control. And by sticking around until the end of this, you will know, the crazy thing is, by sticking around till the end of this, you will know more than most nutritionists, most PTs. I'm not going to say more than most doctors, but you will have, well, to be honest, I'm not going to lie. In some cases, you probably are going to be smarter than most doctors. But anyway, sorry, that's for debate. You get the point what I'm saying here. You're going to be fucking equipped to know the ins and outs of what's important with regard to your health. And this is one of the most exciting topics out of the lot. So I have my coffee. Hope you have yours. Pull over if you're driving. And to be honest, coffee aside and all that shit, you got to grab your notes because this is, it's going to be thorough. It's going to be thorough. We're going to go there today, okay? So do grab a notepad. This is going to be complex. But I do ask you to stick with this and apply yourself. Allow your brain, take some time to wrap your head around this because this is by far the 5 most important health metrics that you need to worry about. That your doctor, that the PTs online, they're not fucking telling you about, right? So, it probably is best that you take some notes. So, yeah, go do that now. And this is worth more than fucking any amount of money. You do these 5 things. This whole idea that, health has to be a guessing game. I don't know if you guys were like me, but, we're told that all these chronic diseases are down to luck of the draw. And all this fucking, that health is a game of chance, essentially. When in reality, it's not. It's definitely more in our control than not in our control, right? So if you've thought that things like, the big diseases like cancer, diabetes, Alzheimer's, strokes, that, these just happen by chance. Well, nothing is certain in this world, and I have to say that because I don't know what they allow on these platforms. You can definitely, and I mean definitely, increase the likelihood of that not happening to you, okay? Likelihood. I'd say that because, I don't know what they allow. And what people are fucking peddling online, and I'll be straight up about it. This is stuff that personal trainers never talk about. You tell me you listen to this conversation, you tell me one personal trainer that talks to you about this shit. They won't. Right? You tell me the nutritionists, the people prescribing these diets, all this shit. Even people saying that a calorie is just a calorie. This is absolute nonsense. Absolute nonsense. And by the end of this, you'll realize how actually detrimental that message is. Living on this assumption that all calories are created equal. They're fucking not. They're not. In fact, if you live by that, you'll see how dangerous that is. Okay? And if you're looking to reclaim and have control over your health, and you want to know the variables that are super important when it comes to unlocking 100% of your potential in all areas of life, this is the one for you, okay? So I'm hyping this up because it is worth the fucking hype, right? So by now, I hope you have your notepad, you have your coffee, I have mine. Let's get into this. Now, it is a little bit complex, so I will make sure to keep it a bit... what I'm really trying to say here is I have a bad habit of going so deep into the science, right? And while that is important, you guys, I don't want to give you that, paralysis by analysis, that information overwhelm, like, and start spouting techno babble, and you're like, oh, fuck this is way too much for me. I just want to give you the surface level, give you the basic understanding, I actually had to put together a formula that I have here on my iPad to make sure that I don't overcomplicate it. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through each health metric. I'm going to address it, explain it, talk about the potential problem and the impacts as well as the solution. And I'm going to do that for all 5, and then we're going to sum it up, right? So think of today's podcast like an educational lesson. Now, beyond that, do put your phone on Do Not Disturb. You want to listen up. Health is not something that we should take lightly. In fact, this is worth more than any amount of any course that you're going to invest in, and you're getting it for free, okay? And this has had profound impacts on my life. If we were to look at this in terms of, let's break it down before we jump in. Let's break down the impacts this has had on my life. And this is why it fascinates me so much, because this is actually the variable. These are the variables, as well as many others, that do correlate. So I can't say causation, but they do correlate to everything that's happened in my life. When I started improving this, everything started changing. So let's look at, for example, mental clarity, brain fog, brain capacity, brain power, the ability to think more clearly, rational thinking, the ability to capitalize on opportunities and avoid pitfalls, okay? Waking up in the morning, physical energy, this is another thing. We're so much smarter than we think. We're so much more powerful than we think, but we're never able to tap into it because a lot of people, myself included, we keep ourselves down at 40% by making decisions that go against what we're going to talk about here today. Now, with regard to even physical appearance, I legit, sorry, it's just hard looking back. I legit was a different person. Sorry, I got to give you context to why I had to pause there. In the studio, I keep a photo of my old self. I never really told you guys this, but I keep a photo of my old self on the opposite side of the studio. And the reason why I do that is to remind me what my life was like, you know, how I used to think, the challenges I was going through, and it kind of keeps me, it gives me understanding to how life was for me, because I've come so far. So I just had to give you context to that. And I'm just, as I was saying that, I was looking, and even just looking at my old self now, it's fucked up in terms of how different I looked, and it just always takes me by surprise. But in terms of the physical stuff in my life, you know, I was overweight. I was a shell of who I am right now. Everything was a grind. I was really confused, and I was never making progress. And now I physically look like a different person without even trying. It's crazy, by focusing on these 5. Then with regard to my relationship, you guys hear me all the time. My relationship is so much better. In terms of my professional life, I've started 2 successful businesses since then. You know, making more money. This is not to brag. This is just an observation for you guys that I pass on because of the profound impacts. Making more money than I did back then. And I'm able to pursue things that I love. And then there was one other thing I wanted to touch on. Yes, the health. In terms of the health aspects of my life, you know, in terms of when we go through all 5, there was a point, and the really interesting thing about this is, for you listening, is if you go through these and you think to yourself, oh shit, you know, maybe if a couple of them out of those 5 aren't the best in my case. Listen, all 5 of these, I'm telling you right now, all 5 of these things I had fucked up in my life, right? And I was able to reverse them all. I was actually able to reverse. I was in the red in all of these, and I was able to pull them back. And this gives me so much peace of mind. And I don't know if you're anything like me, but I'm a hypochondriac, right? When I get a bleeding freckle, when I get a freckle on my arm, I'm saying to Chloe, Chloe, you know, is that a lump? You know, I do be Googling shit. I'm a weirdo when it comes to this shit. And knowing what I'm going to share with you guys today, and being able to optimize and reverse them and fix a lot of these metrics has gave me so much peace of mind. So, you know, if that's some stuff that you want, then let's get into it. All right. So let me have some coffee and let's do this. I'm excited. And I'll keep it really simple, but valuable as fuck. Okay, so the first one. This is by far the biggest one out of the lot. This is no doubt the one that, before we get into it, this one is the common thread that actually runs through all 5. It has a profound effect on the rest to follow. Okay, now I want you to grab your notepad, and the first thing I want you to do is write down elevated blood sugar. Okay, write that down. Elevated blood sugar. Okay, that is the first health metric that I am concerned about. And I'll tell you what, let's explain it and then let's get into the details. So what do I mean by elevated blood sugar, or in other words, insulin resistance? Okay, so hyperglycemia. Sorry, I always have to get a little bit technical. Okay, so hyperglycemia, elevated blood sugar. What is that? Well, first of all, you need to understand that the body has 2 fuel sources. You've got fat and you've got glucose. Okay, and the 2 of those, they compete for oxidation. Now, what does oxidation mean? That means they compete to be burned, in simple terms. So fat and glucose, they compete to be burned. Now, if the body has a choice between the 2, it will burn sugar over fat. If it has a choice, if you give the body the 2 of them, it will burn sugar. Okay? Now, hyperglycemia, or elevated blood sugar, first of all, we have to understand how this happens in order for you to see the impact it has on the body. And that's what I want to give you here today, is help you understand what's actually going on, because that will give you more of an understanding as well as the certainty to fix the problem. So, what happens is, when you consume sugar or glucose, which is just a part of sugar, the body burns that for energy. Now, here's the thing about sugar. Here's the thing about glucose. Glucose cannot get into the cell on its own. So the way energy is created is the cell combines oxygen with the food source, in this case glucose, okay? And they create something called ATP. Now, glucose cannot go into the cell on its own, right? It needs help. Consider your cell like it has a door, right? Think of your cell like it has a little door, and glucose cannot get in without a key. This is how it works. So what does it do? Well, the body releases a key. The body is very smart, and the body releases a key, and that goes all the way to the cell, and it opens the door for glucose to go in and make energy. Does that make sense? I hope I'm keeping this simple. So the body releases a key for glucose to go into the cell to make ATP. Now, here's what I want to tell you. That key is something called insulin, okay? So your cell has these little insulin receptors, okay? Think of them like keyholes that glucose uses to make its way in there. Now, that makes sense. And what happens is glucose goes in, makes energy, and you're full of energy, all right? Now, where does the problem start to occur? Well, I'll tell you. So what happens is, when you consume too much sugar, or you don't move enough, okay, and the cells in your body are inundated with glucose and they don't need any more, well, what happens is the locks on that cell, the little lock that we're putting the key into, they start to become rusty, right? Those little locks, they start to become rusty. So what happens is, next time you go to eat glucose, if you're not burning the glucose that you already have, well, what happens is the lock on the door starts to become rusty. Now, when glucose tries to go in and make energy again, and the body releases insulin, which is the key to get it in, well, the key doesn't work anymore Not because the key is broken, by the way. Not because the key is broken, but because there's an issue with the lock now. It's become a bit rusty. It's resisting insulin, okay? It's resisting the key. So what does the body do? What does the body do? Well, the body knows that having too much sugar in your blood is a bad thing, okay? The body knows that. Wants to save your life, right? And it knows that having too much sugar in the blood, which we're going to get into the impacts in a second, this is not a good thing. So what does it do? Well, being as primal as it is and wanting to save your life, it thinks, oh shit, there's another problem. There's a problem. We need to release more keys. We can't get glucose in. When really it's not the key that's the problem. It's actually the lock on the door because number one, you're consuming too much sugar, or number two, you're not burning the sugar, okay? So, more insulin keys are released, but they don't work. Now, what happens is glucose is now not getting into the cell. Does that make sense? Are you with me? I hope I'm breaking this down so you can understand. Glucose can't get into the cell. And now we have a problem. And when glucose can't get into your cell to make ATP, that is called insulin resistance. And that is when we get elevated blood sugar. Okay? So digest that for a second while I get a drink. Right, this fucking fascinates the shit out of me. This fascinates the shit out of me. Okay? So, let's talk about what happens now. So, now we've got insulin resistance. Now, sugar is not getting into the cell to make energy. So what happens? Okay, so this is when your blood sugar starts to rise, which is not a good thing. And I'll tell you why it's not a good thing. As your blood sugar starts to rise, this is by far the most inflammatory process that can happen in the body. Insulin resistance is by far, I call it public enemy number one, okay? Insulin resistance and sugar, too much sugar in the blood is public enemy number one. And this is the common thread that's going to run through everything we're going to dive into. Now, the reason why this is super damaging is for multiple reasons. Number one, the damage that it causes to the arterial wall is quite significant, okay? So we're told with regard to coronary heart disease, we're told to, anything cardiovascular related, that, these things are down to the look of the draw. We're told that LDL cholesterol, the one you've probably heard of, the bad cholesterol, that these are things you want to stay away from. But nobody ever actually questions why things like this are actually unable to happen. Nobody talks about preventative medicine, right? They talk about treating these problems. We'll get more into this in a moment, but nobody ever talks about understanding why so we can prevent. And that's what we're actually going to get into here in this now. And the damage that the elevated blood sugar and the glucose in your blood causes to your arterial wall, the endothelium. Okay, I'm getting a bit sciencey now, but sorry, I just have a bad habit of that. But the endothelium, the lining of your blood vessels, that starts to take damage. Now think about this. That starts to take a beating. And what that does is that actually lays the foundation for things to get stuck. Now, I'm not going to say that insulin resistance is directly causing coronary heart disease, but it is definitely laying the foundations. I have to be careful with what I say. It is definitely laying the foundations for the likes of supposedly bad things to get stuck, which we'll address in a moment. Okay, does that make sense? So that's the first thing. So it causes inflammation in the blood vessels. The sugar, it binds to proteins and it starts to damage the arterial walls. Now, the second thing, other than the inflammation, the second thing that it does is insulin has a second job. So not only does it open the door of your cell for glucose to go in and make energy, here's the other thing about insulin. insulin acts like the bouncer of a nightclub who, has a bias toward only letting hot girls in the club, right? And what I mean by this is insulin's second job is to prevent any other form of energy other than glucose from being burned, okay? So what I mean by this is when insulin is high, that signals to your body that we're good, we don't need to burn fat. So think about this, we're good, we don't need to burn fat. Once insulin is released, the body thinks we're burning glucose. So never burn fat. So that's the second role of insulin. And what happens is, as long as insulin remains elevated because you eat too much sugar, okay, and you become insulin resistant, well, what happens then is you are signaling to the body to never burn fat. Now, that alone, that second thing, not only causes inflammation, but that actually leads to so much more, which we're going to dive into, okay? Now, I want to go through some statistics as well. Okay, so each one, remember, as we go through this, it actually has a knock-on effect onto each one. But I want to give you some statistics to give you context to how prevalent this issue is. So, the first one is 250 years ago, okay, give or take 250 years ago, the average sugar consumption per year was 2 to 3 pounds. So 250 years ago, we consumed 2 to 3 pounds of sugar per year. You want to know how much we consume per year now? You want to know how much fucking sugar we consume now? We consume, the average person in Western society, typically in America, they consume 77 to 150 pounds of sugar per year. Okay? It used to be 2 to 3 pounds per year 250 years ago. Now it's 77 to 150 pounds per year. Think about that. Think about the damage. Think about the inflammation. Think about the weight gain and all the other stuff that we're going to jump into in a moment. Think about the impact, right? Having that much sugar is going to have on the body, right? And you're probably worried just over a little bit now after listening to this. Well, imagine consuming 150 pounds. That's what the average American is eating up to per year. And if we do the maths, what that means is, and this will blow your fucking mind, the average 8-year-old, 250, sorry, gotta get this right. Today, the average 8-year-old today has consumed a lifetime's worth of sugar compared to 250 years ago, okay? So the average 8-year-old today has already consumed a lifetime's worth of sugar for someone 250 years ago. The average 8-year-old. Think about how fucked that up is. Oh, how fucked up that is, right? And it's super important to look at this from the macro perspective, because we wonder why so many people are overweight, why they're sick, why they're getting these diseases. Even if we look at cancer cells, for example, cancer cells have 10 to 50 times more locks on the door, right? That's insulin receptors. Cancer cells have 10 to 50 times more insulin receptors than a normal cell. What that tells us is cancer literally feeds off glucose, right? Cancer cells have 50 times more insulin receptors than a normal cell, okay? And the average 8-year-old has consumed a lifetime's worth of sugar, right, compared to someone, by 8 years old compared to someone from 250 years ago. Think about that. And then we're still wondering, why people are, why disease seems like a game of chance, why people are gaining weight, right? Does that make sense? Right? If you look at even coronary heart disease, 80% of people who have a heart attack, 80% of people who develop coronary heart disease, they have some form of insulin resistance. 80% of people who have heart attacks have some form of insulin resistance. Okay, we could speculate, keyword. We could speculate that people who develop coronary heart disease, people who have heart attacks, were simply, and this is the truth, many doctors have said it, are simply undiagnosed type 2 diabetics. Isn't that fucking crazy? Isn't that crazy? Right? That's mind blowing to me. 80% of people who have heart attacks have some form of insulin resistance. Right? So the next question becomes, without going further into this, because we could talk about this all day, the next question becomes, what is the solution? What is the solution to this? Well, first of all, I do want to say that 74% of the food in US supermarkets, as well as in the UK, it's quite close. The main Western countries, 74% of the supermarkets in America are loaded. The foods are loaded with processed sugar, okay? 74% of the foods in US supermarkets contain processed sugar. And this is the issue. The first thing is, it's not sugar as a whole that's bad. Natural sugars are actually okay. I'm talking about added sugar. That is the first thing. There is zero requirement for added sugar in the body. And I'll tell you, people want to say that carbs are essential. First of all, carbs are not essential, right? The body can actually produce glucose on its own, right? Through a process called gluconeogenesis. That's how smart the body is. And that's how important glucose is for the body. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't have glucose. What I'm saying is we shouldn't have added sugar, right? It takes 22 micronutrients to break down food and produce ATP. Now, what does added sugar give you out of those 22 micronutrients? None whatsoever, okay? Sugar has no, added sugar has no biological value in the body, right? It is not nutrient dense whatsoever. It's actually empty calories. And you're giving the body these calories that it does not have the micronutrients to break down. Whereas when you have natural sugars, okay, the way this worked with regard to evolution, I don't want to go down a fucking rabbit hole now, but back then, we would have had to work hard to get the sweet things in life, right? We would have had to climb trees. We would have had to expend energy. Nature didn't intend on us having, having an abundant access to just taking sugar off a shelf, okay? Especially not this added sugar, right? It was honey, it was berries, stuff that was loaded with positive stuff too, like antioxidants, polyphenols, flavonoids, all this, okay? Natural sugars are better for the body because, number one, they're lower on the glycemic index, okay? So when you have, say, a banana, or when you have berries versus something that's processed, the sugars in that fruit, that will actually be released into your body much slower, so you don't elevate your blood sugar as much, right? And that's because of the fiber content in it. Let me just give you a little tip here while we're on this note. I don't want to go into too much depth, but that's why blending the fruit is a bad thing. You don't want to blend the fruit, because what you're actually doing is you're changing the composition of the fiber. And what this does is it removes the protective barrier that actually inhibits and slows down the speed that sugar goes into your blood. So when you blend up the fruit, you're actually changing the way the fiber is structured. And essentially they're sugar bombs. People are out here drinking fucking fruit juices when really it's just the same as it's called free sugar. You're just fucking letting sugar fly into your blood, right? So don't blend the fruit, eat the fruit, okay? Because the fruit actually has stuff there that, number one, could have antioxidant protection, right, to help lower inflammation. And number two, it has more fiber. Processed sugar doesn't have any of that, okay? So let me get a drink of coffee here. Now, to continue on that note, to make sure that you do not develop insulin resistance, well, the complete opposite of insulin resistance would be being insulin sensitive. So how do we become insulin sensitive? Well, the first thing I would recommend is lowering inflammation. And number two is becoming metabolically flexible, okay? Training your body to be able to burn fat as well as glucose so it doesn't become over dependent on glucose, and the cells, okay, your insulin receptors, don't become rusty and you don't develop this problem. Okay, so that's what I would do. And the best way to do that is to become metabolically flexible, have carbs that are lower on the glycemic index, right? You'd be surprised if you look up the glycemic index, right? You probably think that there's more sugar in fruit than in the likes of bread or, some of the stuff that you eat. Check it out. You'd be surprised what's higher on the glycemic index. And if you don't know what the glycemic index is just basically a measurement of how much glucose will go into your blood, and it's ranked, okay? So what you got to do is you got to lower inflammation, first of all. That's always key. And then the second thing is you got to become metabolically flexible and insulin sensitive again, okay? You got to become metabolically flexible. Now, as I said, this has a knock-on effect. This is one of the biggest drivers. This is why we spent so long in this. We're going to move a little bit faster through the rest, but this is like the big domino. This is public enemy number 1. So we're going to move on to number 2. Okay, this one, when I first learned about this, I couldn't wrap my head around the word, so I'm going to break it down and help you understand it the way I did. Okay, so this is point number 2. Go write this down in your notes. So, the second health metric that actually comes as a knock-on effect of number 1. Okay, the second health metric that I worry about is something called high triglycerides or elevated triglycerides. Okay, triglycerides, triglycerides. Now, you're probably thinking, what the fuck is a triglyceride, right? I was thinking the same thing. I don't know what the fuck that is. All you have to remember about triglycerides it's a fancy way of saying blood fat. Triglycerides are the amount of fat that's in your blood. Now, how does this come about? How do we get more fat in our blood, and why is it a bad thing? Well, let's look at what it is and how it comes about, so then we know how to prevent it as well as the impacts. So, triglycerides, or in other words, in simple terms, blood fat, this essentially stems from when you have elevated blood sugar. Well, the body thinks that energy can be used later on, okay? And what it does is it stores it away. It thinks, okay, you know what? We might not have food later on. Let's put this away and store it as fat. So what does it do? It packages up that blood sugar into something called triglycerides and stores it away as fat. So triglycerides is the form that the excess blood sugar takes when it's being stored away. Okay, so remember that. Triglycerides is another way of saying blood fat. Now, what is the problem with having high levels of triglycerides? Well, there's multiple problems. The first thing is when you have elevated amounts of blood fat, okay, when you have extra fat in your blood, this thickens the arterial wall in your body. This thickens the walls of your arteries, which number 1 is not fucking good for many reasons because, it's going to allow the buildup of plaque. It's going to elevate blood pressure. But secondly, on top of this, and not only will that cause inflammation, but secondly, on top of that, it's signaling to the body to store this as fat, which means you're gaining weight, okay? And this fat, these triglycerides, are inflammatory by nature, okay? They're inflammatory by nature. Now, this comes as a result of insulin resistance. This is the key here. Insulin resistance, when that sugar, I said this already, I just want to reiterate it because it's super important. When that sugar can't be burned, part 2 then is it gets stored away as triglycerides, right? Leads to weight gain, more inflammation, and thickening of the arterial wall. Now that actually ties into point number 3, the third health metric. So write this down. We're moving on to point number 3 now, which is abdominal obesity. Write that down. Okay. So, the third health metric after triglycerides that I worry about is abdominal obesity, or in other words, visceral fat. Okay, so the internal fat around your waist. Okay, so you can obviously see this visually, but this is the interesting thing about point number 3. Just because you are skinny, does not mean that you do not have visceral fat. In fact, 40% of people, okay, 40% of people who have a normal BMI that are skinny, and that's the way the health industry says, make health out to be. They make it about one metric, which is weight, and they say if you're skinny, you're healthy. If you're fat or you're overweight, you're not healthy, right? Bullshit. It's these 5 that matter. But 40% of people who have a normal weight, they will have just as many metabolic risk factors, okay? They will have just as many of these 5 metrics as someone who doesn't have a normal BMI, okay? Now, on this note, you can be thin on the outside and fat on the inside, right? It's called TOFI or TOFI. I don't know how to pronounce it. TOFI. Thin on the outside, fat on the inside, okay? So just because you can't see it does not mean that you do not have visceral fat. Now, as you start to become insulin resistant, think about this. You start to become insulin resistant. You have a sugar or an energy burning problem. Your triglycerides start to increase. Okay, that is causing more inflammation. The inflammation alone is going to slow down your metabolism, but beyond that, the fat is being stored and you are going to start gaining weight. Now, what happens when you start gaining weight? Well, 3 bad things happen. Number 1, it promotes insulin resistance even further, okay? So the more insulin resistant you become, the body is signaling not to burn fat, okay? The second thing is your arteries are under more pressure, okay? As you start to gain more weight, as more stuff is building up in your arteries, the pressure is going to increase, okay? So think about this. When you tighten a vessel in a fixed system, the body is a fixed system, there's 60,000 miles of blood vessels in your body. And when they have less space to transport blood, the pressure is going to increase, okay? So your blood pressure increases, okay? Big factor in terms of coronary heart disease, big factor in strokes. Insulin resistance exacerbates this massively, okay? And then that alone, each one of them, the weight gain, the high blood pressure, as well as the terrible food, this causes even more inflammation, okay? And when you have this inflammation, this just compounds on top of each other. Your arterial walls take more of a beating, and you are now prone and susceptible for terrible things to lay the foundations, okay? Now, 2 other things that happen when you start to gain weight. Your metabolism starts to slow down because you've got an energy burning problem. So it actually starts to compound, okay? Losing weight is harder for you, okay? You're starting to gain weight more easily. But the other thing that happens, which leads us into point number 4, right? So write this down. We're heading into point number 4 now. This is interesting as fuck. I love talking about this. Okay? Point number 4. As you start to gain weight, and as you're eating the wrong foods, as you're consuming too much sugar, you've got high amounts of blood fat, you're gaining weight. Well, the 4th thing that happens, as all that happens, the 4th thing that happens now is you have low HDL cholesterol. Now, this is interesting. And this, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole here, but I need to give you context. Cholesterol gets a really bad rap in the body. Cholesterol essentially, and this is just opinion, but the emerging science, the data clearly shows this. All right? And put your rational thinking cap on here for a second. We're told that cholesterol is a bad thing. I want to address this now. We'll get into the HDL cholesterol in a second, but I want to address cholesterol overall. First of all, we're told that it's a bad thing. That is the stupidest thing that I've ever fucking heard in my entire life. Okay? People talk about lowering cholesterol. Did you know that 80% of the cholesterol in your body is produced by your body? 80% of the cholesterol in your body is produced by your body. That's the first thing, right? So even if you wanted to lower your cholesterol, you fucking wouldn't be able to. That's the first thing. The second thing is it's so vital, right? I want to break down how important this is. The first thing is it is literally a part, cholesterol is part of the cell wall, okay? The cell walls in your brain, okay? Cholesterol actually helps maintain the integrity of your cell walls so nutrients can pass in and out, all right? All you have to do is check this out. Let's actually touch on a few more points here. Not only is cholesterol not only is cholesterol a part of your cell membranes, the cell wall, but let's look at it, what it's needed for in the body. It's used for the synthesis of many of your hormones, okay? Cholesterol is needed for your hormones. It is literally the building block, right? For testosterone, all your sex hormones, cholesterol is needed. Cholesterol is needed for the synthesis of vitamin D, right? You cannot make vitamin D without cholesterol, right? If you have a vitamin D supplement, look at the back of it, cholecalciferol, right? Cholecalciferol is a precursor molecule of cholesterol. What it does is you get the UV photons from the sun, they combine with cholesterol to make vitamin D, right? One of the most important, if not the most important vitamin in the body, okay? If we look at beyond vitamin D, if we look at the bile acids in your stomach for digestion, it needs cholesterol. You need cholesterol to break down food. Now, help me understand, do you think it's a good idea to remove the molecule that is part of the cell wall, right? You want to remove that? Do you think that's a good idea? Do you think it's a good idea to remove legit a part of what makes up the cell wall? Right? I don't think that's a good idea. Do you think that the main building block for your hormones, right, that are super fucking important, do you think it's a good idea to remove one of the main raw ingredients from that, say, factory line where where the little workers are producing the hormones in your body? Do you think we should not deliver the raw material for them to go and create things that are super important in your body? Do you think that we should limit that because vitamin D is not important? Do you think that we don't need bile acids as well as so many other things in the body? Do you think that's not important? I think that would be the stupidest thing ever to lower that. Now, we're going off topic here, but I just have to give you a lot of context on this. To continue, why does cholesterol get a bad rap when it's so vital? It's so important. Well, we know that, the other thing, I left out one major important thing here. So important. Fat is demonized, all right? We're told that there's two types of cholesterol, which there is. We're told that cholesterol is terrible. And you always hear the term good cholesterol and bad cholesterol. So let's actually debunk this before we get into what we're actually talking about. It's just the context is super important here. You've got LDL cholesterol, which is the supposedly bad cholesterol, the one that builds up in people who have heart attacks. Then you've got HDL cholesterol, which is the so-called good cholesterol. Now, let's differentiate between the two. And let me help you understand what's really going on here. So the fat-soluble nutrients, vitamins A, D, E, and K, right, as well as the nutrients that are made of fat, and fat specifically, they cannot go into your blood and get to the destination that they need to go to in your body to do their job. They cannot get there on their own, and I'll tell you why. Because your blood is made of water, and you know that fat and water don't mix, okay? So when you consume fat-soluble nutrients, they cannot get to the destination on their own because fat and water don't mix. So what they need is, think of cholesterol, right? Think of cholesterol. We've got two different types, LDL, the supposed bad one. You've got HDL, the good one. Now, they are fat molecules. First of all, they have very important roles. They have very important roles, as well as all the other fat-soluble nutrients. They cannot get to the destination on their own. So they need a vehicle. They need a bus. They need something to protect them. Think of it like a cargo ship, right? And what they do is cholesterol, as well as other fat-soluble nutrients that can't go out into the sea on their own, they need to get on a cargo ship or a bus, okay? Now, this bus is called LDL, low density lipoprotein. That's what LDL stands for. Now, we've got HDL, which is high density lipoprotein. Think of LDL as the small bus or the small cargo ship, okay? And think of HDL as a bigger bus or a bigger cargo ship, okay? And what happens is LDL is responsible for transporting all the fat-soluble nutrients such as fat, cholesterol, vitamins A, D, E, and K, as well as much more around the body because they can't get there on their own. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? I don't think that's too complicated to understand. So they have to get on board this cargo ship called LDL because they need to get to the relevant destinations to go do their job. Vitamins A, D, E, and K, super important, have to go to work, right? We know that cholesterol is super important with regard to cell membranes, with regard to vitamin D, with regard to hormone production, with regard to the bile acids in your stomach, and so much more, right? All, great molecules going off to do a great day's work. Think about that. What they do is they leave the bus station in the morning and they head out to work, and LDL essentially drops them off. Now, that's the role of LDL, low density lipoproteins. Now, HDL, high density lipoproteins, think of this like an empty cargo ship, or think of this like an empty bus. At the end of the day, the empty bus goes around the 60,000 miles of blood vessels and they pick up anything that's left in your bloodstream. They pick up anything that's bad, they pick up anything that shouldn't be there, and they remove it from the bloodstream. Does that make sense? That is what HDL cholesterol does. HDL cholesterol is a bigger bus, a bigger cargo ship that takes the bad stuff out of the bloodstream. Does that make sense? Right? So just think about that for a sec. I'm just grabbing a drink. Now, excuse me, sparkling water, so gassy. So now, you know what LDL does. LDL drops off the fat-soluble nutrients to go do an honest day's work. HDL clears the bad stuff out there, and it's an empty bus or an empty cargo ship, whatever way you want to look at it. Now, why does LDL get such a bad rap? Why is LDL said to be such a bad thing and it's causing all these heart attacks? Well, what you have to ask yourself is, why is LDL, which has such vital importance in the body, why is LDL getting stuck, right? Because what the studies are based off, and this is a conversation for another day, but essentially, these are observational studies, and what they found was that people who consume high levels of saturated fat have higher levels of cholesterol, and higher levels of LDL cholesterol are found in people who have heart attacks. But that does not mean that LDL cholesterol was causing the heart attacks, correct? Right? You can't just assume that LDL, just because it was building up, is actually a bad thing. And that's what happened. LDL has got convicted of a crime that it didn't necessarily commit. What if we were to speculate, right? And the science shows this. What if we were to say that LDL was convicted of a crime that it didn't commit? Okay. What if LDL was actually like what if LDL was like a fireman putting out the damage that sugar had caused? That all the inflammation, right? All the damage to the arterial wall itself, that when LDL, okay, was dropping off cholesterol to do its job, what happens if cholesterol was trying to get out of there, right? And it got stuck. That's what we need to start looking at, okay? It's not necessarily that cholesterol is bad. It's when you lay the foundations, when the body is in a chronic state of inflammation, okay, and you have insulin resistance, right, which then causes blood fat to rise, the triglycerides, you have an increase in inflammation in the arteries, okay, you start taking damage to the arterial wall. The pressure now increases. That pressure alone, think about this, the pressure alone in your blood, we're actually moving on to point number 5 in advance, and I got to touch on this to finish off point number 4, and then we're going to move on to point number 5. Okay, so HDL cholesterol, sorry, I told you I'd go off on one, but I think you guys are enjoying this, right? So let's touch into HDL and finish this point off, and we'll move into point number 5. So HDL cholesterol, we know, which is the fourth health metric here, HDL cholesterol is responsible for moving the bad stuff out of the bloodstream. Now, to conclude this point, the health metric that you need to be concerned about is having low levels of HDL cholesterol. And the reason why low levels of HDL cholesterol is a bad thing, which people who tend to eat a lot of sugar, that are insulin resistant, that have high triglycerides, they typically have low levels of HDL cholesterol because they're not eating foods that are good for you. They're not eating foods that are high in HDL, like avocados, as well as they're not exercising as much, which helps increase HDL cholesterol, and they're usually more overweight. The leaner you are, the higher your HDL cholesterol, okay? And what happens is, when you have low levels of HDL cholesterol, you are not clearing the bad stuff out of your blood. Now, to continue where I was going on to point number 5, write this down. This is fucking important. Point number 5 is blood pressure. And this, again, these all tie in together. Blood pressure is super important, and that you get this in check, okay? Because when you have high blood pressure, which is the 5th health metric that you don't want to have, right? You don't want to have high blood pressure. And I want to make sure that I stay on point with this one. High blood pressure, or in the scientific term, is called hypertension. Now, how do you know if you have high blood pressure? Well, first of all, anything over a reading. So the blood pressure readings are done based on systolic and diastolic measures. So it's a ratio. And if you have hypertension, if you have high blood pressure, your reading will be anything above 130 on the systolic measure and anything over 85 on the diastolic measure. Okay, so 130 over 85, anything above that, you have high blood pressure. You essentially have, you're hypertensive. Now, why is this bad and how does it all correlate? Well, here's the way you got to think about it. We're talking about cholesterol, right? Well, high blood pressure is super damaging because this is what actually causes so much damage to the arterial wall. Think about this. The higher your blood pressure, the harder the body is pumping to transport blood, the more of a pounding that your arterial wall is going to take. Now, think about this. The more cracks, the more damage that takes, you then increase the likelihood of things like LDL cholesterol, right? Which is super important. LDL is super important, has many vital, and I mean vital as in you would die if you did not have it, right? That's why the body makes it itself. LDL, LDL has the opportunity to get stuck doing a good job. Does that make sense? Because let's look at this. Let's go right back for a second, right? You're causing inflammatory damage from being insulin resistant and the elevated glucose in your blood. That is inflammatory by nature. You are already causing damage to the blood vessels. The second thing is you have high levels of blood fat, okay? Triglycerides. That is thickening the artery wall, and that is an inflammatory process by nature. The inflammation is also causing damage. Now you start to gain weight. Now your blood pressure is going up. Now that's even more inflammatory and more damage to the arteries. And on top of that, You have HDL cholesterol, which is responsible for moving any of the bad stuff, okay? It's the bigger cargo ship that comes around and collects everything out of the blood. That is not there now to prevent that. And then compound all that with high blood pressure. Now, think about this. Now, your arteries are in a perfect state, right? For disease, for all these, things like coronary artery disease, atherosclerosis, okay? The buildup of plaque in the blood vessels. You are now susceptible to all these happening, okay? We know that cancer cells have 10 to 50 times more insulin receptors than normal cells, okay? LDL is not necessarily bad. Just because it's found at the scene of a crime does not mean that it committed the crime. Does that make sense? What if, and you're pretty rational, what if the inflammation itself, which seems quite clear, the inflammation itself is the precursor to all these bad things happening, right? Come on, think about this for a second. It's quite obvious in my opinion. When you compound each of these, right, it's the damage caused that's actually allowing the onset of many of the metabolic and chronic diseases that we see today, right? All you got to do, especially with the cholesterol stuff, all you have to do is look at why would the body create a molecule that was designed to kill you? That's the first thing. Then you have to ask yourself, why does cholesterol build up in the arteries and not in a vein? Think about that for a second. Right? Why does cholesterol build up in the arteries and not in the veins? Well, that's because the arteries are responsible and they're under so much more pressure. That is why when there's high blood pressure, the cracks in your arteries, the damage to your arteries allows LDL to get stuck in the first place. Now, rather than saying, right, because modern healthcare and nutritionists, they say, oh, lower your cholesterol. First of all, why would you lower something that is super important that you would die if you did not have, right? And rather than doing that, why not question why it's getting stuck in the first place? Wouldn't that be more important, right? Because that's what happened in my life. I started asking these questions. Well, like, okay, yes, I admit cholesterol is found at the scene of the crime, but let's give it a fair trial here. Did it commit the crime? What if sugar, what if elevated blood sugar, what if insulin resistance was the big domino? What if that was public enemy number one and it was getting off? It was getting off on all these charges, right? Because I think that's what's really going on here. And if you look, excuse me, just give me one more sec. My throat is going a little bit dry. So if you look at this as a domino effect, it all actually starts with insulin resistance, right? If you were to reverse engineer and you were to look at your notes right now, you would see that is the common thread that runs through so many of this. If you look, as we said, if you look at the people who have heart attacks, okay, 80% of people who have heart attacks have some form of underlying insulin resistance, okay? Insulin is responsible for how much energy you're going to burn. Not only how much sugar you're going to burn, right? How much sugar you don't burn, how much fat you burn, because not only does it get glucose into the cell, but it also prevents fat burning. That is an interesting thing about insulin. When your body is in a high sugar environment, when the body is in a high sugar environment, it is physiologically impossible to burn fat. I'm going to repeat that. When the body is in a high sugar state, it is physiologically impossible to burn fat because insulin is signaling to the body to not burn ketones, okay, which is, or not to burn fatty acids also, okay, that's what your body burns, ketones or fatty acids, right? And when insulin is high, that can never happen, and that starts a very dangerous knock-on effect. Now, to sum up those 5 health metrics, what I didn't tell you at the start is something very interesting. Those 5 health metrics put together, they form one bigger thing, right? They form something that scares the fuck out of me. They form something called metabolic syndrome. That's what they form. Those 5 health metrics, right? If you have all 5 of them, if you actually have 3 out of 5 of those, so all 5 are the risk factors for metabolic syndrome, and you are declared to have metabolic syndrome if you have 3 of those 5. So let's list them off now together. We have elevated blood sugar. We have high triglycerides or blood fat. We have abdominal obesity, right? And that does not just mean that you're fat on the outside, right? You could be skinny and still have visceral fat. You have low HDL cholesterol and you have high blood pressure. Now, here's the interesting thing about this. That'll scare the fuck out of you. 66% of people who develop coronary heart disease, 66% of people, right? They have metabolic syndrome. 66% of people who have heart attacks, 2 in every 3 people who have heart attacks have metabolic syndrome, right? And surprisingly enough, check it out, surprisingly enough, not all of them, their LDL cholesterol levels are elevated, right? Most of these people have normal LDL cholesterol levels, but 66% of them have metabolic syndrome. That's because this syndrome is so inflammatory. It actually allows the onset of so many of the big diseases that we fear today, right? 66%. And all you need is 3 out of those 5. So how do we reverse it? Because I was able to reverse this in my life. I actually had all 5. I have all 5, and I want to make sure that we stick to the agenda here. Sorry, I'm just making sure that I stay on point, because this is actually going way longer than I thought. But I told you, this is the shit that excites the fuck out of me. This is the stuff that's most important, as well as all the other stuff that we talk about. This is the stuff that's worth more than any amount of money. Now, okay, how do we reverse it? Because I had all 5. Let's go through this together. And especially, if you've been following me for a while, you've probably seen the big changes in my life. And that was because I was working hard on reversing this. So let's go through this. In my case, I had elevated blood sugar. I was somewhat insulin resistant. I wasn't type 2 diabetic, but that's how type 2 diabetes comes around, okay? So I had an energy burning problem. So how do we fix that? Well, the main two things are you got to lower inflammation, because we know that inflammation is the root of all evil. It is. We know that sugar is public enemy number 1, and insulin resistance is the common thread that runs through the 5 risk factors of metabolic syndrome. Okay? So what I done was I knocked added sugar on its head instantly. Right? Now, by cutting out processed foods, okay, the supermarket, 74% of the food in the supermarket in the USA has added sugar. I cut processed foods out entirely. Number 1, that lowered inflammation because whole foods are less inflammatory by nature. I started having more natural sugars and foods that were lower on the glycemic index, okay? So I could become insulin sensitive again because I was insulin resistant. By doing that, think about this, by becoming insulin sensitive again and teaching my body how to burn fat, because there's 2 fuel sources, fat is much more efficient, okay? The body uses half as much oxygen, right? The body uses half the amount of energy, give or take, to produce energy from fat versus glucose, okay? So there's less oxidative stress on your cell. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole right now, but fat is actually a much more efficient fuel source. But anyways, I got my body insulin sensitive and I became metabolically flexible again. And what this done was, by training my body to burn fat, I lowered my triglycerides, because what happens is the body now has a chance to burn all that excess fat that was stored, okay? It was stored initially to be burned later on when the body assumed that you may not have energy, okay? You may not have some sweet foods, so we're going to burn this fat later on. This is what the body was built to do. So when I had less amount of glucose, my body started burning fat again. That lowered the triglycerides. In fact, they plummeted. And then I saw my abdominal weight, the fat around my waist, disappear. Right? I became a lot leaner. I was a lot leaner. If you look, there was a 6 to 7 week period in my life where I went from 12% body fat down to 4.9. I went from 12% body fat to 4.9, and I didn't lose muscle. I have the data to back this up. Now, and we've done this with so many clients. We've stripped half of the body fat. I swear to God, we've stripped half the body fat off people within 7 week periods, right? 7 weeks, we've stripped people from 22, 23% down to 11%, okay? Now, my abdominal weight disappeared, my visceral fat lowered, my HDL then increased. And my blood pressure lowered. My blood pressure used to be in the 130s. I was hypertensive, okay? I was told to take all these blood pressure and lowering pills, right? Based on the interventions when they're trying to lower blood pressure through nutrition, on average, it's about 5 to 10 points. I was able to bring my blood pressure down to on average, 115 over 65. 115 over 65. My blood pressure is considered excellent now, okay? My pulse wave velocity, right? So I'm 26 right now. My pulse wave velocity, which is a measurement of arterial health and flexibility, my pulse wave velocity is 5.7 now, okay? This is below what it's so what it's doing is the pulse wave velocity is essentially measuring how fast something can travel. Pulse wave can travel through your arteries, and if it can travel further, that means your arteries are stiffer, okay? They're not as flexible. They're more confined, they're closed off, and the pulse wave travels much further, okay? So a higher pulse wave velocity measurement is a bad thing because you don't want it traveling that far. In terms of what it's meant to be, mine is actually below the average. I'm like in the below category. I used to be in the fucking high category. Now, I was able to not only just reverse metabolic syndrome, I am now in a place where my health is fucking phenomenal. I'm in the green zone in all 5 now by a long shot. So the first thing I want to say to you is that it is reversible. Right? That's the first thing. Excuse me. Now, how do we do that? We got to lower inflammation. We got to become metabolically flexible, right? We need to become insulin sensitive again. And what happens is actually magical things start to happen in the body when you do those 2 things. Magical things happen. Like I said, my body was able to burn fat again. It brought the triglycerides down. My visceral fat, my abdominal weight disappeared over time, over the course of 6 to 7 weeks, stripped, right? I looked, felt, everything was different. I can't even explain. I literally felt like a new fucking person, right? My HDL increased, which was then taking all the bad stuff out of my blood. And because I've less weight, less inflammation in the body, the blood pressure came down as a result. And we know that blood pressure is one of the biggest risk factors for so many diseases like heart disease, stroke, and so on, okay? And by lowering that, well, now my arteries don't take as much damage. They're not pounded under pressure. Therefore, LDL cholesterol is not a worry of mine. LDL cholesterol is not a worry of mine because I have low levels of inflammation. My blood pressure is low because I understand that LDL actually has very important and vital roles in the body. It's not even considered. If you look up metabolic syndrome, LDL cholesterol isn't even a fucking measurement. It's not even one of the risk factors of metabolic syndrome, right? What you should really be worried about is having high levels of chronic inflammation, not the biological life-saving inflammation, but the higher levels of chronic inflammation that goes unnoticed, that keeps you living life at 40% and not being metabolically flexible. They are the two things that I would be worried about and I would be changing. And when you do that and when you reverse that, as I said, magical things happen. And just to add one more point to the whole cholesterol hypothesis, and this is a story for a different day, but all you have to do is look at two things I want to mention on that. All you have to do is look at the Framingham study, okay, where they studied thousands of people over the course of years in the United States, and look at the correlation between people who had high levels of LDL and heart disease, right? And it's a linear, it's a very linear association. You can see it. It's like, oh my God, the higher LDL was, right? The higher LDL was, the more at risk they were for heart disease. But what I want you to do is I also want you to then look at when they added in another variable. When they added in the variable of people who had high HDL cholesterol, that same data set, right? This will just prove this. That same data set, add in the variable of HDL cholesterol, and you will see when you look at that same graph, but you add in that, show the people who had high levels of HDL, that is typically associated with, I'm not going to say concrete, but people who have high levels of HDL, they're leaner, they're much more insulin sensitive, they have lower triglycerides and typically lower blood pressure, right? Typically, look at the association and look at the graph drop. It's almost flatlined. It's almost flatlined, right? Literally Google this. Write in Framingham study, LDL, and then add in the word. So look at the LDL graph first, and then add in HDL, and you'll see when you show the people who are metabolically healthy, look at the risk for the development of plaque buildup, right? It flatlines. And the other point I want to add to that is for you to think about is when you're fasted, when your body's in a fasted state, the body needs to make energy, right? So naturally, when you're in a fasted state, LDL cholesterol actually increases in the body, okay? LDL, when you're fasted, increases in the body, right? It doesn't build up in the veins. It builds up in the arteries. Why does it just choose the arteries? Because it's not choosing. It's not choosing to get stuck. But anyways, listen, this has been going on. I don't know how long we've been going here. This has been quite in depth. Just looking at my iPad here. Okay, so holy shit, we covered a lot. We covered a shit ton. So to sum up how to reverse that: lower inflammation, become metabolically flexible, and magical things start to happen. Not only does getting to 100% become so much easier, it's almost by default, right? You won't be able to recognize yourself, because I couldn't believe what life was like when I reversed this, okay? When I done what I said, like mentally, in terms of my brain capacity, my brain power, my IQ, in terms of how I was able to avoid stupid shit and spot more opportunity, in terms of my physical power, my physical strength, my physical appearance. My face looked different. I look like a different person now. I didn't even realize that I could look like this, right? And I'm not saying that in a, hey, look at me, I'm amazing. I'm just saying this is so much better than how I used to look. Then in terms of my creativity, my focus, my energy levels, right? I don't have these crazy crashes the way I used to. In terms of my relationship, right? I'm just such a better boyfriend, right? Chloe has, looks are important in relationships, and I don't want to make it all about that because it's 50-50, but to deny that that's not important, it is important. It is important. And anyone who says that, physical appearance and physical standards are not important, it fucking is. It is. With regard to business, right? With regard to business, there's so many things that this has improved in my business career. Not only business performance and how much more money that I've been able to make, which is crazy because I always say, how do you correlate correlate reversing what I spoke about? How do you correlate improving your health with making more money in business? And it's such a hard thing to do. And it's not only until you do it that you'll see what I'm talking about. That is that. And then in terms of how serious people take you when they're like, holy shit, this guy, this girl, they're super sharp. I want to do business with them. They have really high standards, right? That's important. People take notice of that, right? People look at you and say, fuck, that takes discipline. That takes hard work. They care. You know what? If they care about themselves that much, they care about my business, right? Then with regard to the health, benefits, I'm never sick. I am never fucking sick anymore. Touch wood, with the help of God, as well as doing everything to stack the odds in my favor. I'm in control. I do not worry about half the shit that I used to worry about. You know, that all these chronic diseases are a game of chance. Okay, there is no certainty, and winning has no guarantees. All we can do is increase the likelihood of the outcome. Okay, but I'm not worrying about that stuff anymore. I know the real reason where all these diseases stem from, right? And it's stemming from being in an inflammatory state from the likes of insulin resistance. And knowing what I know now, this gives me peace of mind. Okay? And it's really easy for me to see how prevalent metabolic syndrome is and these health metrics, how much they've went south when I look and observe the masses. And these are just observations. This is not being judgmental. This is just legit an observation. I can see very quickly all 5 of them with people. You know, I can see who's insulin resistant. Okay. I can see who has high triglycerides. Okay. I can see who has visceral fat. That one's quite evident. I can make a guesstimate that you have low HDL cholesterol, and I know that your blood pressure is higher. Okay. And all we have to do is look around in society, right? I think it's almost 1 in every 2 Americans. 1 in every 2 Americans, they are obese. I'm pretty sure. I'm. Don't quote me on that one. I have the statistics on my iPad here. Actually, let me just. No, I don't have time. I was gonna pull up the statistic. I think it's 43% of Americans. Right. Quote me on this one. I'm pretty sure 43% of Americans are obese, and this scares the fuck out of me. This scares the fuck out of me seeing this. But to finish this off, it's within their control. This is reversible. Life does not have to be this guessing game. Health does not have to be a guessing game. It's within your power. And being on the far side of this has changed my life tremendously. And I hope that this gives you an understanding. This is the stuff that doctors don't tell you about. This is the stuff that when they tell you a calorie is just a calorie, that shit's bullshit. A calorie is not just a calorie. Right? I'm making decisions based off these 5 health metrics. And anyone who says otherwise, that, you know, all calories are created equal, it's just about being skinny, or it's just about being whatever. If that's the case, then NFL or rugby players, they'd be sick. They're not healthy. And that means people who are skinny, they're fucking healthy as fuck. Right? There's rugby players, there's NFL players who are metabolically healthy that are not at risk compared to people who are skinny. Right? All you have to do is look at countries with high all you have to do is look at countries with high diabetic rates that don't have obesity rates. You'll see that obesity and diabetes are 2 completely different things. Right? Diabetes and obesity are so night and day different. But they're both of them are risk factors. Both of them, not just one. Does that make sense? But just know this, that it is within your control. It is within your control, and it can be reversed. It does not have to be a game of chance. You can stack the odds in your favor and put yourself in the best position to win. Whew, that was a long one. I hope that, first of all, what I would say to you is you need to take time to study this. You need to take time to go through in depth and think about it and question what I'm saying. Look into this on your own. Obviously, we will bring this to you fresh out of the fucking oven. You know, we're on the trenches doing the work for you to lighten your load, to put you in the best position to win, right? And that's, you know, again, shameless plug. This podcast is powered by Winners Win. that specializing, putting people in the best position to win for real. This ain't about fucking getting shredded. This isn't about losing weight. This is about stacking the odds in your favor, winning, and doing that for as long as possible, right? The fucking 3 big pillars of our company are health, power, and legacy, right? These are 3 things that we will never sacrifice: health, power, and legacy. And we know that power is not something that we want to exert over other people. Power is the ability to act, control, or influence, and we want unlimited power over our lives. Does that make sense? That's what our company is about: health, power, and leaving a fucking legacy, and making an impact on this planet, whether that be for people around the world, whether that be for your family. Leaving a fucking legacy and maximizing the most of our valuable time on this planet. Because maybe we'll sum it up with this, because we've been going for a long time. We're only here for 80 to 100 years, and the version of you right now, let's call it version 1.0, right? Whether you're happy with that person right now or you're not, when your time is up on this planet, whether you go to heaven, wherever, whatever your religious beliefs are, I can tell you now with certainty, the version of you right now at this moment in time is not coming back, right? We won't get into where you're going after, but let this sink in. When you're gone, right? So why not maximize the fucking little amount of time that we're gifted with, right? In terms of our galaxy, we are so fortunate. We have gone from, no life being here to single cell species forming 3.5 billion years ago, to multi-cell species forming 500 million years ago. And within that 500 million years, we've been able to produce music. We've been able to go to the moon. We've been able to, create computers. We've been able to do so many amazing things, right? And as of right now, there's no signs that anywhere else in our galaxy has been able to do that. So technically, in the grand scheme of our galaxy, planet Earth and where we are right now is the most valuable place in the galaxy. I don't even get all fucking space and shit, right? I'm going down fucking a space rabbit hole, but think about it. You are in the most valuable place in the galaxy right now. So why not figure out what version 2.0 looks like? Why not discover what's possible at 100%? Why not make the most of this time, right? Why not make the most of this time? Gary Vee, he said, what is the odds of being born? I think it's like 400 trillion to 1. 400 trillion to 1, and you're worried about some stupid shit. You're worried about what the fucking neighbor has. You're worried about what you're gonna wear. Fuck that shit. You're here for 80 to 100 years. Let's max it out. Let's put ourselves in the best position to win. We're only here for a short amount of time, right? So listen, we're gonna end it on that. We are working on Discover 100 at the time of you listening to this. It may be live, it may not be live, but Discover 100 is essentially our flagship product that we've decided to give away for free. I had to dwell on this for a long time, and I was thinking about this as the founder of the company for Winners Win. I said, our most valuable product, should we give it away for free? And I'll tell you why. I'll tell you the reason why we wanted to do Discover 100 for free is because if we can help people get to 100% for free, right? If we can take people and change people's lives in advance, well, there's no better way to sell. There's no better way to prove to people that this is the way than actually getting them to do it first. If you're so fucking good at what you do, I always say this to business owners, especially if you're in the B2B space, if you're so fucking good at what you do, prove it. So what I said was, you know what? Let's fucking give it all away for free. Let's change people's lives in advance, okay? Let's change people's lives in advance. And if they want to go further, they want to learn more about the science, they want to learn more about supplements, they want to do whatever, right? If we change their lives for free and facilitate that value in advance, right? and prove to people, hey, this is the way. More is possible, right? I'm telling you, good things happen when you do that. Good things happen when you do it. And I said that I believed that the ROI on that would be immeasurable, right? You would create so much goodwill because I know the profound impact this had on my life. And I know that if that can be passed on to millions of people, that will be something that our company will not be able to measure. So that may be live right now by the time of upload for this. I'm not sure. But to end this, take time to study the fuck out of this. It's super important. More is possible. And remember, the difference between winning and losing is the ability to execute regardless. And what I want you to do is, if this is super important, if there's someone in your life that you care about, and you want to see them unlock the potential, you know they have more in them, you care about their health, right? You want to see them live a long, fulfilled, happy life, share this podcast with them. Please, I ask that. This could change someone's life. Like, this was the biggest thing in my life that changed everything for me. And you never know, it could be one, you could be one conversation away. Someone in your life could be one conversation away hearing this. And as we said, maximizing the short amount of time that we have on this planet. So listen, I appreciate you as always. It's been a pleasure. Let's fucking go, right? Execute regardless. Steamroll anyone who gets in your way. Appreciate you.